Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion during the live stream. And we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in. All right, welcome back. I've got another great guest today. For those of you who are watching live, this is a podcast double header because I had one earlier today. So this afternoon, I'm welcoming all the way from Vancouver Island, Jolene Hermanson. How are you doing, Jolene?
I'm great. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we dive into your story, I always like to give people a little snapshot of kind of like where you're at right now. And then what we're going to do is we're going to rewind the clock and go back and kind of discuss how you got to where you are. So what are you up to these days?
Yeah, so I'm a Precision Nutrition Level 2 certified coach. I primarily coach women who want to improve their relationship with food, body image, confidence, and really just want to have, I think, similar to you, like similar values to you, freedom from food, just so that they can move on to bigger and better things. So,
yeah.
That's
awesome. But this isn't actually your educational background originally, right?
No. Yeah. So my bachelor's of science was in earth science. So yeah, far off. And then my master's of science was in hydrogeology and geochemistry. So cool. Science related, but in a totally different field.
Yeah. What led you to study earth sciences? What was kind of the thinking behind that? What inspired you?
Well, I grew up in a really small town in British Columbia. So I spent the majority of my time out in the backyard, in the trees, playing in the forest, looking at the rocks, wondering about the rocks, wondering, about Earth and like how we got here. And thinking back, it was almost more of like a meta question I had of like how, and I wasn't super interested in like diamonds and gems. It was more of like, how did we get here? Like, what is, when I look at something, like, how did it get here? And so that's kind of what led me into earth sciences. I remember once as a kid in grade 7, my teacher showed us the map of the world and he showed us how the continents fit together like a puzzle piece. And it just like blew my mind. I was like, what? How come nobody has ever told me about this before? And so that really like sparked my interest in earth sciences. And then, yeah, I mean, as I kind of went through high school, earth science was always like, I always did well in school, and earth science was always considered like the lesser of the sciences. But I just, I found it so interesting. I was like, how could people like not want to do this? So that's really what pushed me to do that initially.
Yeah. So you had like a genuine passion for this, born out of like a childhood curiosity, really.
Yeah, totally. I think the problem there was that I ended up developing a bit of like, I don't know, anxiety, I guess, around grades and the pressure to do really well at school. So it's interesting that you say that, because I think when looking back, there was a switch where I stopped being curious and I started caring more about the grades. And that's when it stopped being fun for me. It started being more of like, let's just memorize everything I need to memorize to get an A+. And who cares about the curiosity? So it's interesting you said that, because I just recently realized that connection.
Huh, that's fascinating. Yeah. So kind of earlier on in life, like where did you grow up? Small town BC, there's a few of those. So where did you grow up?
It's Quesnel, BC. So it's just south of Prince George. People might be more familiar with Prince George.
Yeah, for American listeners, it's a dot in the middle of the big province somewhere in the trees.
Yeah.
So
if anyone has ever heard of like the Barkerville Gold Rush, that's kind of something we learn about in school in Canada. So that Quesnel is like right near there. And actually I have a lot of family, like my grandma grew up in Barkerville. My great grandparents lived there, and my grandma played the organ there for like 30 years or something. So
That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
I remember learning about Barkerville because I grew up in British Columbia as well. I remember learning about it and wanting to go there because I thought it'd be so cool to pan
yeah.
for gold.
Where
It
were you
seemed
from in BC again?
at a town called Chase.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah, I got married there.
okay, very cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like this little town on the Shuswap Lakes.
Hmm.
Yeah, just a very a speck on the map that if you kind of blink as you're driving down the highway, you might miss it. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So did you ever make it to Barkerville?
I didn't, not yet. I'll say
Okay.
not yet
Okay.
because at some point, and maybe I'll bring my son there. Actually, I think that'd be kind of cool
Yeah. Yeah.
to bring
He'd
him
love it.
and spark his curiosity because he's a very curious little boy. He's 15 months old, and he's always like stooping down and like picking up the tiniest little speck and kind of like studying it
Yeah.
and investigating it. So it's really neat to see that sort of curiosity in him already.
Yes, totally. I see that in my kids too, especially my son. He loves anything to do with geology and volcanoes.
Well,
And so
volcanoes,
it's
of course.
yeah,
You can just blow things up.
obviously. Yeah, but even minerals, he'll ask me about the
Yeah,
minerals and like where they came from and stuff. It's really neat to see it.
yeah. I
And
used
I
to work.
like that I can give him an answer.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
You're like the coolest mom in that regard. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but so growing up in a small town, like you said, your parents divorced at a young age. How old were you when that happened?
Yeah. I think I was 10 or
Okay,
9 or 10. Yeah, and so when they divorced around them, but there was like at least a year or two or maybe even 3 prior to that that was the build up to the actual separation. And
right,
so
right.
yeah, that was definitely a defining moment for me.
Yeah,
Moments.
because growing up in a small town, I know
Mhm.
I'm not sure what the population of Quesnel is. My hometown was like 2,000 people, so it wasn't very big, and it was like, when stuff happened, like word traveled really quickly. And I'm going back to
Yeah.
like the 90s and stuff. And so, did that create any sort of stories or awkwardness, around your friends or anything like that?
Yeah, yeah, actually, I had forgotten about that, but it was very awkward. I feel like nowadays mixed families or, different families are much more common. But
Hmm.
back then, I remember I think I was the only one of my friends who had divorced
Right.
parents, at least that I knew of. And
Yeah.
I remember making, I think it was no, what was it? Christmas cards, maybe? And I had to make 2 different cards. And I remember one of my friends going, "Why are you making 2 cards?" and saying it really loudly so everyone could hear. And I remember my stomach just sinking and not wanting to explain it. Everyone looked at me. Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally had forgotten about that.
That's it's
Yeah.
so fascinating because actually the guest I just interviewed prior, he mentioned something that happened when he was about 10 years old. It was a little different, but it was someone who called him fat. But
Mm,
the parallel here is when we take a strong experience in childhood and like there's an emotion attached to it, it leaves an imprint where,
mhm,
it is even possible for that to sort of be recalled in adulthood. Whereas, there's probably lots of things that you've forgotten from your childhood, but something like that, it sticks out because there's a really strong sort of uncomfortable or negative emotion attached to that, which is really
mhm,
interesting.
mhm. Totally. Yep. Yeah.
So, and why I'm curious about it because I think about how it sort of shapes our interaction with the world as you kind of move into the teen years, and you mentioned some anxiety showing up, and were there other sort of difficult? I mean, I think every teenager's life is difficult. It's like this funny transition as we're trying to kind of find our way in the world. But were there other difficult experiences that you had as you were going through your teen years, like trying to find your way in the world?
Yeah, so after my parents split up, that would have been 94, and
Mhm.
then my mom met my stepdad who lived in Vancouver Island in 97, and he spent the year traveling up to Quesnel to stay with us, but then by the end of that year, he was like, "I don't wanna do this anymore," and my mom, like you said, it was a small town, she wanted
Yeah,
out of there. She
yeah.
wanted to have a fresh start, so they decided to move us, but, I mean, I was going into grade 9, so 14. My brother had never been he'd only ever been in an elementary school in rural Quesnel. And so for him, it was even probably a bigger transition. I at least had grade 8 under my belt. So I had to leave all my new friends that I had made in grade 8 and then go
Oh
to
man.
grade 9. And I feel like as adults, we're like, oh, whatever, kids are resilient. But like that was a really, really challenging time in my life. And I was almost more worried for my brother at the time because
Mm-mm.
hadn't really had to ever meet new people before in his life. So that was tough. I'm looking back, I'm really grateful because I ended up meeting some of my lifelong friends
Yeah, yeah.
in my new high school, but that 1 year period, it was all about like the awkwardness of trying to know who you were and trying to understand who the kids were. There was one group of people that I initially tried to hang out with, and just through the words that they used and how they showed up, I realized quickly that it was not the right group for me, and I don't even know how I knew. It was like you were talking about, that emotional, this gut feeling that they were not the people I should be hanging out with, which I really credit my parents and some of my older, like, people that I hung out with as babysitters that allowed me to see that even at a young age. And from there, I found my true group of friends that I'm still friends with to this day. Yeah. And it's interesting how, without really knowing why, it was just something in that gut instinct that just told me that these were not the right people for me, even though they were popular. But that wasn't my tribe.
It's so funny when because I'm sure that there's been movies. I don't watch a lot of movies, but there's been movies made about like high school dramas, and like the popular kids are usually like jerks, like not very nice people.
And that's what this was.
Yeah, and then there's like the outsiders, and it's funny. When I was in grade 9, it was super awkward because I had to get like braces, and I had glasses. So I had glasses and braces, like a double whammy, and I was sort of finding my way into my like physical stature because I was like 6'1" when I was like 13 years old. I'm still the same height. I never grew beyond there. I was like, darn it, it just stopped.
Wow.
But so I'm this gangly, awkward kid trying to find my way, and turns out
it's hard.
Actually, it was super, super awkward. And then people would, just kind of make fun of your physical appearance because that's how they sort of make themselves comfortable. So how old were you kind of when the anxiety started showing up for you? So when the love or the curiosity was starting to get replaced by this pressure to perform?
Yeah, I think I was thinking back on this even as I was preparing for the show and thinking of when that started. So when I was in high school, before moving, I was really, really active. I was active running around my backyard in Quesnel. I was active as a track athlete in grade 8. So I ran a lot. When I moved to Nanaimo, we were in a little city. So I lived in like a little house with no yard. And of course I was entering grade 9. So I didn't really want to run outside and play. And then by grade 10, I got a job at McDonald's, and I ended up putting on a lot of weight. I mean, not really like relative to a lot of other people, but for me and my body size, it was a lot of weight. And the more than the weight, I lost all interest, and I forgot like who I was. Like I forgot that I was an athlete. I forgot that I actually liked running. It was like I became very sedentary. And I think that change in my diet had a big impact on my energy and my clarity, like my mental like state, without realizing it. I didn't understand that. I didn't understand nutrition had that big of an impact on people. And then because I gained weight, and people didn't say you're fat, but I remember one kid in particular, one guy that I liked, like he was really cute and I had a crush on him. He started calling me Fat Joey, because Joey was my nickname. So they'd be like, don't worry, we wouldn't actually call you Fat Joey if you were fat. Don't worry. But I was like, I am. Like, I kind of am. I've gained a lot of weight. Like, I know that. And so it was like we're just joking, but not really kind of comment.
Like the there's a lot of truth said in jest kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so that was hard. And so by that grade 11 or 12, I think it was grade 12, I started trying to like lose weight. Like I never had even tried, or even I didn't know how to. I didn't even know really what had caused me to gain weight. So I did that by not eating all day, classic, and then going home and being like, well, I didn't eat all day, so I'm just gonna like, now I can eat everything.
Right.
And then I'll also eat dinner. Like it was just like the classic like,
disordered eating scenario. Yeah.
Yes. Like deprivation and then, or like restriction and binging kind of things. And so that obviously didn't work. I think I probably gained more weight. So it was very like confusing for me. And my mom was always very small. So I just didn't understand. Like I didn't know how she could do that, why I couldn't do it. There was a lot of confusion there. I think that might've been when the anxiety might've started. Yeah. And then also my mom and my dad still at that point had like, this was like 10 years later, and they were still arguing over money and over how we were going to pay for school. So when I finally went to university, I felt like there was a lot of pressure on me to do well, because there had been so much angst over who was going to pay and how it was going to happen. So I was like, okay, well, my parents have gone through so much grief to save for this, to put me here. I have to do really well. And I also, like, God forbid I gain the weight back, because at this point I had started running a lot in order to lose the weight. And also, like, just basically I was intermittent fasting without knowing what that was. I wouldn't eat all morning. I would go for a 10K run, and then I'd have like 2 meals a day. So yeah, I lost a lot of weight. But I think that even the food I was eating, the 2 meals I was eating, was like, had no protein, maybe 1 serving of protein at night. So I was completely undernourished. I wasn't eating a lot of vegetables. I just didn't know. I had no idea. I just was trying to eat as little as possible. Yeah.
And this is kind of going back to like the, early 2000s, I would think, give or take. And so like the internet was a thing. It's hard for people to imagine, now, but like the internet was a thing, but it wasn't like that big a thing the way that it is now. It wasn't quite as ubiquitous. So
I didn't know how to use it.
Yeah.
Like, I would have never have thought, like, to Google, like, what should I eat? And if I had, what would the sources that came up would have been probably complete garbage.
Yeah.
Like, what was even on the internet in 2000?
Yeah. What a crazy thought, So you're kind of, so now you're at university, you're sort of grappling with some of these sort of emotions going back and forth, and maybe feeling a little bit out of control with the emotions and the eating and whatnot. So it feels like it's kind of like a turbulent time in your life as you're still trying to kind of find your way.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. I felt like I had a lot of pressure to perform, and then also to like, with the body image stuff, there was a lot of turbulence there too. I mean, I'm laughing about it now because I'm not laughing, but I'm just like, wow, like, as I'm reflecting, like, it's interesting to see how far I've come with that.
Well, I think that's an important part of it, because like we chuckled a little bit about like kids being mean and things like that. And I think what that speaks to is not that it's a funny thing that kids are mean, but we can kind of look back and we go, oh man, like that was tough. Humor is kind of used, or it's almost like a tool rooted in resilience. Like we can kind of laugh about it now because it was a hard time back then. I wouldn't want to go back there, kind of thing. It's like when I share some of my story and some of the things that I've been through, people wonder how I can talk about it in kind of almost like a lighthearted fashion, even though I nearly died. But it's really about, it's like I've done the work to get through the hard stuff, and now there's almost like a sense of camaraderie when you connect with somebody, you look back and go, yeah, that was pretty tough, wasn't it? Yeah, it really was. We didn't know what we were doing. We were total dummies, or that kind of thing, right? We just our perspective on the world was so small back then.
Yeah, totally. I love that, like a tool in resilience. It's so true. Yeah.
You mentioned also before we started recording, you struggle a little bit with anger as well, and because I just listened to you talk, and you're very calm, you're very collected, you're very eloquent, you're a great communicator. So I'm trying to picture, like, you're struggling with like sort of anger issues. How did that kind of show up for you?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I literally just I had this conversation with my 5-year-old today, trying to teach him about like why this happens to people.
Yeah.
Like when we see red and why that happens. And the analogy I used was sort of that precision nutrition analogy they use with the elephant and the rider, using that as the metaphor of, and I know they weren't the original ones. I think somebody wrote a book about it.
I know Chip and Dan Heath wrote a book called Switch.
Yes. Yeah. So using that analogy of the elephant as the primal part of our brain, that very innate, like automatic behaviors part of our brain, and then the rider being the prefrontal cortex, like the more the logical part. And so
the thinky brain,
the thinky brain, and so I was sort of, I was telling my son about a story about an elephant and a rider. And anyways, so thinking back when that started for me, I mean, it probably started just because, like, often as kids we get stressed and we react. Our prefrontal cortex hasn't developed yet. I think for me, what it was I saw my parents model reaction and anger, and that was their stress response. Like my mom's stress response was anger. My dad's was as well. And then also a bit of like the opposite, the completely remove yourself and
shutting down.
Shutting down. Yeah. So I saw both of those. Mine is definitely more on the just the reactive, like fight side rather than flight. And so I just never was told that was something that you didn't have to do, that you didn't have to react. I was never
Yeah.
told that was an option. I was never told, I was just told to behave. That didn't mean anything to me when I saw red. And so
No
I
kidding.
think because, yeah, so I didn't know why it was happening to me. It all seemed very truthful in my mind. I didn't realize it was my thoughts creating the intense emotion and what to do about it when I started into it. And
Well, I think that like nobody in the history of being told to calm down has actually calmed down.
right. Never works.
Right.
Like,
Just calm down.
oh, right.
Yeah. Now I want to punch you in the face for
Yeah.
saying that.
Yeah, exactly.
Not
But for
advocating for
sure,
violence, but yeah.
right.
But the thought crosses your mind.
The thought at that time, yeah. Well, I think just seeing it, like as a kid, seeing that was how other adults in my life managed situations. So that must be the way we just manage situations. And if you're not angry about it and fighting about it, then you must not actually be angry about it.
Right.
So
Maybe
I
like,
wanted
like you don't
people
care
to
about it.
show, yeah. And I really cared. Like I wanted people to see how much I cared. And so I would like get angry about it. I think that actually has been a huge transformation for me. The more I thought, okay, this isn't working for me anymore. It was really my husband. My husband's the opposite of me. We're both very calm now, but his stress response is more to just back away from the situation, which typically is normally the much better approach. And I can't think most situations unless, we're actually in danger, but which actually has happened. But so I saw him do it and I thought, maybe there is another way. Like, why can he handle a situation so much better than I can handle a situation? And then that's what started getting me to learn about emotional intelligence and what that even was, and realizing that I wasn't skilled in it at all. It was a skill that I needed to develop. And, going through precision nutrition, learning about emotional regulation, I was like, oh, okay, this is something that I'm not hopelessly lost at. It's just a skill that I haven't developed. So how do I develop this? And then of course, having kids, nothing is a better teacher for your weaknesses than having children. And that was that's the biggest teacher for me is having children, especially my son, I would say is the one who teaches me the most constantly on a daily basis. And even when I think that I'm like, okay, I'm very zen now, like I don't react the way I used to, I can handle a lot of things coming at me, there'll just be one time where he is like on top of me over and over and over. And I'm like, okay, this is it. I've hit my limit, my wall again. I have to dig deep again. I have to grow again in this skill. So yeah, I think for me, that's always going to be the thing I am constantly having to really notice and be mindful of. Maybe eventually it won't be an issue. Maybe as my kids get older, I don't know. I've had parents with kids say, that never ends, but never. Yeah.
So, where did you meet your husband?
We met when we were both doing geology work, actually. So we were in Nunavut, literally in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. Yeah. We met in Winnipeg, and then we flew to Baker Lake, which is like way up north, like in Nunavut. And then we took a plane to a fly-in camp, and we stayed there for a month and a half. And that was with a larger group of us. But then him and I, because we were the more seniors of the group, went to another camp. And that's really where we got to know each other for a good 3 weeks. And it was this uranium exploration camp, and super random. Yeah. And just
that's actually...
literally in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, well, that's what an interesting litmus test of like sort of a budding relationship. Was there any kind of like you meet him, any kind of like, oh, we got to keep professional boundaries here, or was there like when you first met her, was this kind of this inkling like there might be something more there?
No, it was just very professional at first. I think, as we got to know everybody, we were all sort of younger. We all like our boundaries, like we just became friends, all of us. I never was super close to him. I was more close with some of the women that were with us. And then when it was just the two of us it wasn't just the two of us. We were the only younger geologists. There was other people who ran the camp at the second camp. that was when I started to get to know him better. But it was always pretty professional. We never crossed any boundaries when we were up there. But then towards the end, I realized that I really liked him, and I was like, I'm never going to see him again if I don't say something. So one day we were out on the quads together, and I was so nervous, like where you're like, your stomach's in the pit and you're just sweating everywhere. And we had these bug nets on because the mosquitoes were so bad. So we had these bug nets. I couldn't really see his face. He couldn't see mine. And then I just was like, so I told him that I had feelings for him, and he just said nothing, and I couldn't see his face. And I was just like waiting. And then finally he was like, I feel the same way. And I was like, what? And like, just I'll never forget that, like that day and that moment. Just felt like I was like on cloud 9 after that. Because we only had, I think, 1 day left in camp. So that was like my last chance. As he lived in Saskatchewan. So that would have literally been it. And so then after that, we kept communicating. He came out to visit me, and then we just started seeing each other after that. So we've been together now. That was in 2008.
Okay.
So
what a cool story though. Like, we connected in the middle of, like, for those who aren't familiar with Canada, none of it is a territory in northern Canada that's connected to the Arctic Ocean. And it's like vast, unpopulated, there's a couple of small settlements up there, but it's vast sort of unpopulated wilderness up there. You must have been up there obviously in the summertime if the mosquitoes were that bad.
Yeah. July, August.
Yeah. You don't see much of a sunset there. Maybe it goes down for a couple hours kind of thing.
It didn't. Maybe towards the end in August, it dipped down, but there was definitely there when we were there in July where it didn't get dark ever. And there would be times where I would go out in the middle of the night, like 2 a.m, to go to the washroom, and I would see. Once I saw a wolf, like just kind of roaming out long in the distance. We saw muskox. We saw, wolverines.
Incredible.
Tons of caribou. It was really cool.
Yeah, what an experience. I'm just thinking this is almost like a scene out of like a rom-com or something, like the mosquito net on and all of this, and you're like, I have feelings for you. What?
Yeah, totally. Sitting on a quad, like a ATV, and
that's awesome. So I mean, you must have sensed that there was something mutual there when you decided to take that, take a risk. But isn't that really interesting to think about, kind of our emotional response? Like, I'm going to make myself vulnerable here at risk of rejection, but this is more important to me that I express this, because the regret of not expressing it would be even worse.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. I had that exact conversation with myself probably like 3 times before I did it. I was like, if you don't, this is going to sit with you for the rest of your life. And I mean, nowadays, it would have been easy for me just to like look them up on Facebook or something. But back then I probably could have, but it just, I don't know. I didn't even think to do that.
Right. Again, it wasn't like it's hard to again explain to people like how social media wasn't quite so ubiquitous even like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That
wouldn't Zoom now, right? Like we have Zoom, it would be no big deal. But back then you'd go on Skype and it was like, like you couldn't really, it wasn't the same.
Well, my wife and I were like Skype pioneers back in 2005 when we were, she was back in Australia and I was in Canada, and we weren't yet dating. So, but we would like try to Skype back and forth, and there was like a 3-4 second delay because there's a lot of cable between Canada and Australia. Like,
yeah.
And so
that delay is the worst.
Oh man, it was super, super awkward, but somehow we made it work. And 17 years later, we're still together. So, but that's very cool. So, how long were you sort of a practicing geoscientist then?
At that time or now, I guess when I left last time.
Yeah. So we're kind of where we left off.
So I guess
you made a switch at some point.
Yeah. So, I mean, technically I still am licensed as a PGO. So, professional geoscientist. I suppose I became a professional around 2014, I guess. And so, I would have been doing that it's hard for me to do the math on this because I had a couple mat leaves in there as well.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But from the time I graduated in basically 2008 to, 2020. So eight-ish years.
Yeah. So when you and your husband are like out going for walks, do you like pick up rocks and nerd out on them?
Oh yeah. Totally. It's more me and my son.
Fair enough.
Sometimes
Yeah.
my husband and I, it's funny because he's a geologist too, but he did it for different reasons than me. Like I really loved the science and I still do. And he's just like, like he
It
doesn't
pays the
care as
bills.
much. Yeah, like he
Yeah.
like some of it is
Yeah.
interesting, but like he was never as nerdy about it as I was. He liked the dinosaurs and the he's more in the engineering field now, so he likes the engineering side of things, whereas
Yeah.
I was way more interested in like the geology of it itself. But
Yeah.
yeah, we totally nerd out though.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm just trying to imagine like what a conversation would look like, where you pick up a rock and, the average person's like, oh, this is a red rock,
Yeah. We're like, do you think this is sedimentary or igneous? Like, what depositional environment do you think this is?
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But it's so cool for your kids because you can pass that curiosity on when they sense that energy that you're like, hey, this is really neat. Let me show you this neat thing. You think about like even like when we go through school and high school and even university, the teachers and professors that are really passionate about it, we sort of feed into that enthusiasm. So in a sense, you're fostering that sort of enthusiasm and creativity and curiosity in your kids by being excited about it.
Well, I love seeing him connect the dots. So I'll talk about geological layering. So like if something happened a long time ago, it's going to be down here. And then over time, sediments get built up. So it's like a layer cake. And then sometimes that cake gets shifted. And I don't know if he's really understanding what I'm saying. And then we'll go outside. And in Nanaimo, we have a lot of sandstones with layers, just like what I talked about. And he'll look at a rock and be like, hey, Mom, look, there's the layering. Like that must be the oldest one there at the bottom. And I'm like, I didn't even know that until I was like 20. Like, what is happening? Or he'll go to school and his teacher, they're in kindergarten, and she was talking about matter, like what matter is. And he comes home and he starts talking about matter. And like, we start talking about the Big Bang and like all these things. Like, I just see his head just like putting all these pieces together. And it's so cool. I'm like, I didn't know any of this stuff in kindergarten, like not even close.
Like a whole different world altogether in terms of
their ability to take abstract concepts and then like apply them to our life is really cool.
Yeah. So at some point though, this thing that you're really, really passionate about, you decided I don't want to keep doing not maybe I don't want to keep doing this, but I found something I'm more passionate about still.
Yeah, there was always something missing when it wasn't with the earth science thing, it was more with the job I was doing. So I was I loved the people, loved the company, but it was like very technical, very like there wasn't a lot of involvement like what we're doing now. I found like where I could like I wasn't really helping my clients necessarily. I had a lot of like guilt almost with that. I was like, what am I even doing really? So when I was on maternity leave, I just found myself constantly searching. I was like, something is missing. Like, what is it? And then my friend showed me Precision Nutrition, like their level 1 certificate, like the promo for that. Dr. John Berardi was talking about deep health and like coaching people. And I was like, deep health. I'm like, what is that? And I was looking it up and I was like, oh, and that's where they talk about, not just the physical health, but the mental, emotional, environmental relationship social. And like the existential and social. I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. I love thinking of it that way. And then how he was talking about skills and skill building. And I said before, when I learned about emotional regulation, how that's a skill. And the concept, the values of it really appealed to me. And then when he started talking about coaching, I was like, what is this coaching? Like, this sounds amazing. And so that I think what it was there was a lot of skills in there that I recognized in myself I needed to build. So I wanted to learn it for myself. Even when I was a project manager at my old company, those skills was really what I think I was lacking. And I think I had a lot of stress because I wasn't able to properly manage my emotions. I was not able to place boundaries around the work I was doing. I was people pleasing a lot. So it just became too much for me. And I think that appealed to me. It was almost like I just inherently knew that I needed to learn these things. I wanted to learn these things. And then I also loved the appeal of helping other people because I had come a long ways in my own like nutrition and health journey. And I wanted to help others do the same because I was part of this fitness community and I saw a lot of women struggling and had so much stress around food. And I was like, it doesn't have to be like that. Like I used to be like that
Right.
too. It's so much better on the other side. It's so much more freeing. So anyways, that was just like, boom. Like I was like, this is it. And I remember running downstairs to my husband being like, this is what I want to do. And I was showing him I trying to like get him to speed watch the video.
Like watch the whole thing and feel as excited as I do.
Exactly. Like he was like, okay. And so I did it. And then the level 2 opportunity came up. I just was like, and that was all about coaching. I was like, heck yes, like let's do this. So I did that, loved it. And I think now, like I love the coaching aspect more even than the nutrition side of things. Like the coaching to me is like, it's so powerful. And so I love it. I love working with clients, love the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think again, I always identify like parallels. There's differences obviously in the struggles that I've had, but I was looking for something as well, and I'd looked for all the answers in nutrition science. I mean, I was a voracious reader of examine.com, and I ran a supplement store, and I could tell you every ingredient in every supplement. I've got a good brain for this sort of useless information, but so I was like the super like supplement guru and nutrition science nerd, thinking that was where I was going to find the answers to my struggles, and not really realizing that like I needed help with the emotional side of things. And it wasn't until I'd hired coaches before, and it was a super frustrating experience. I remember hiring a coach who is to this day like a good friend of mine. I don't know that he'll see this. He might, but anyways. But at that point in time, like I was just not in a good place mentally. I was really struggling with a lot of things, and I in my head I had this idea that I want to look a certain way, then I'll be happy.
Right.
And he was just like, John, you're smart. You know this stuff. Why aren't you doing this? What's wrong with you? Kind of thing. And I felt like there's this huge disconnect. Like, you don't get it, but I don't get it either. Like, I don't know why I can have all this knowledge, be all this educated, even coach other people successfully, and couldn't seem to help myself. And so it was like bridging that gap. And I wonder if you had something sort of similar in terms, maybe not exactly that way, but like in your journey of trying to figure out like, what is the missing piece here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, I think the missing piece was like the self-compassion. I think I was still struggling with putting a ton of pressure on myself without really realizing I was doing it. But like, I should be able to do this. Why can't I do this? I think and then also putting a ton of pressure on myself with school, like where it really started to raise its head was when I was doing my master's. I was miserable trying to do my master's degree. I picked a subject that I had no interest in. Like big scale picture I did, but the actual science of it was so incredibly difficult. I didn't know what I was doing. And anyways, I had so much anxiety around it. And so then the whole like using food to calm down, it became like a big thing. And I was also trying to get married at the same time. So I was trying to like look a certain way. And that time in my life, I think it was like, I got so low that I remember the exact moment when I was in the car with myself, or not with myself, with my husband, and saying to myself, I'm done. Like I am done trying to live up to some expectation. I'm done trying to like look a certain way. It's not worth my health anymore. Like I had just gotten really low. And I think at that point I decided to put myself first, because it was like unbearable for me to not be doing that. So that was a turning point for me, and not realizing that that's what that was, but that really was a very compassionate thing to do. Because for me, the self-compassion has sort of 3 components to it. There's the kindness piece, like kind to ourselves. And what's interesting is the more I do it to myself, the more I'm able to be kinder to others. There's curiosity. So like, why am I doing this? What is this behavior solving for me? I never asked that question before. I just thought you shouldn't do it. I didn't ask, why am I doing it? And then what is the 3rd component? I just had this conversation with my friend, or actually a client yesterday.
I think about like shared humanity, but I'm not sure if that's
shared humanity. Exactly. Yeah. Knowing that this isn't just me. This is like something that happens to all of us, or in some form or another. Maybe not with food or with, but like lots of things. So the shared humanity. So that was my missing piece. And I didn't know that for a long time.
It's super interesting because I'm like, compassion was exactly the missing piece for me as well. And it
Mm,
was when I was ready to give up on coaching. I was like, I've tried all these coaches, and it wasn't that they all suck. I felt that way, but I was just frustrated because I was like, they can't seem to help me, and I don't know what I need. And that was, I think we find a lot of people like in this place where like, I need help, but I don't know what I need. So I'll turn to what is
mm,
familiar. So I'm going to turn to like restricting food intake. I'm going to turn to maybe trying
yeah.
exercise. I'm going to turn to all these different things, maybe all the supplements. I mean, when I ran the supplement store, I used to joke that I was like a bartender without alcohol. People would come in at the counter and just like talk and talk and talk and pour out their hearts. And I was like, man,
Oh.
I got to be able to help these people, but I didn't know what the missing piece was until I ended up hiring Scott Quick, who is a coach at PN there. And he, I thought I was hiring him because I was like, he's like in his 40s, he's jacked. I'm in my late 30s. I hope I kind of look like him or have a physique like him. Maybe he can help me get there, sort of thing. And instead, he showed me this tremendous amount of compassion. And
Mm.
there was a lot of resistance when I first encountered it, because it really sort of ran into like conflict with my sense of identity and how I saw masculinity and
Oh,
being, and things like that. So it was really super interesting
wow.
to, but you said like, the more that you practice compassion on yourself, the more you're able to show it to others. And I think that's
Mhm.
really, really powerful.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Can you think of specific things that he did that showed that compassion?
I think what sticks out is I would write to him about how like mad I was at myself and how disappointed, and how
Mm,
he must be so disappointed in me because I'm like not living up to some expectation. And he just got curious about it. He's like, that's really interesting, and so like compassionate curiosity is like the central theme for the coaching that I do. Really, I say compassion and
yeah.
integrity are my two core values, but compassion is the heart of everything I do. And it's this ability, because I like the idea that compassion is not about like a get out of jail free card. In other words, it's not about
Mhm.
excusing or enabling unhelpful behaviors,
Mhm.
but it's about
Mhm.
looking to understand, removing the lens of judgment so we can kind of understand. And so he just modeled this curiosity for me. And I
Mhm.
was like, at first, again, it felt so foreign because I just was not used to, especially coming from like another male, someone who I looked up to, who, physically, in terms of physical stature, I looked up to and whatnot. It was interesting to see, like, actually see this is what it looks like, you know?
Right. Right. That is really interesting that because I don't deal with that side of it, but I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
just what you said about it kind of went against your identity. It's like,
yeah, yeah,
holy, yeah, if compassion is something that is directly contrasting what you think of as an identity, no wonder it was so hard to do. And it's
yeah,
funny
yeah,
you said that about not being a like get out of jail free card. I've talked to clients about this where they're worried to show themselves compassion because if they do, they think it's a slippery
yeah,
slope to go back
yeah,
to
yeah,
old
yeah,
habits. So really having to try to make that distinction for them. Um, and that it's a struggle for a lot of them. Like, okay, I'll have compassion for myself this one time, but then
yeah, yeah,
what if that's like now I'm gonna just keep telling myself it's okay every time I go.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's one other part of your story that I wanted to touch on here, because I think it's really, really powerful, and that is the experience that you've had with your dad and the
Yeah.
change in health that you've seen with him and how you've navigated that. Because I can't imagine how difficult it is. And so maybe we kind of go back to when you first got the news that he had this diagnosis.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was another reason why I went into became very interested in health from earth science. So when I think it was around 2014-ish, 2015, we started noticing really big changes in my dad. And when I say big changes, it wasn't like, you know, oh, dad's forgetting his keys. It was like, huh, dad doesn't know where to put the coffee pot. That's odd. And so I think I knew very soon just because he's my dad and like it
Mhm,
was
mhm.
the symptoms were so bizarre that I was like something's definitely wrong here. And other people, doctors, nurses were like, "Oh, it's just depression." They were saying it was depression, which isn't I shouldn't say just depression.
Right, right, right.
I had a big eye opener that I didn't realize depression could have physical manifestations like that, like such confused symptoms. So
Right,
I
right.
learned that actually could happen with depression. Still, though, the symptoms seemed so bizarre that I was like, I don't know. And I unfortunately I was right. It wasn't depression. although depression can be a precursor. So what he ended up being diagnosed with was dementia. And one of the reasons why they didn't think it was dementia is because he was very young. He was only in his, I'd say, mid 50s when he developed it. And with dementia can happen decades before you actually get the diagnosis. So that caused us to kind of go back and go, was there any signs of this, any warning signs? Through that, I mean, when I get stressed, like I said, I take action. Like I'm just like, okay, well, what do we do? What do we do? Like I researched everything. I did all this, like poured everything into all the recent like potential cures that have come up with. Yeah, there's not really anything. But I did find Dr. Bredesen, and he's in the United States, and I think, I mean, this was several years ago now that I was reading all his things, but he was one of the leading researchers in this. He's had papers where they've actually helped and had like scientifically noticed improvements in people's cognition. It was mostly though people with earlier, like I think they have a different term for it when it's not quite dementia yet. But he talked about the 36 holes in your roof, basically. So his analogy of a boat where it's raining. And if we think of our health, if we think of our brain health as having like a protective roof over our heads, there can be like 36 is probably a lot more now. It's probably more like 40 something. Different contributing factors that could cause somebody to go into cognitive decline. So the problem is when it comes to clinical trials and things like that, they're only ever looking at one thing. And that one thing might not be the thing. There might be 36 of those. So it's been very difficult for them to actually come up with any kind of diagnosis or any kind of cure for this. So what his 36 holes were, a lot of them were related to lifestyle, stress, sleep, nutrition, insulin resistance, molds, like environmental things. So we don't really know which one of those things or combination of those things caused my dad to get it. Genetics is another thing, right? Like but none of his parents had it. They all lived to an old age, totally had no dementia or anything, even into their 80s. So I have my own guesses as what caused it. But the bottom line was for me was like, okay, like if this is genetic, I could potentially get this. What do I need to do to help myself and my kids and like, start changing things now if this can happen decades before? And a big part of that for me was like stress. Like the stress I was trying to put on my body, on myself from all the pressure that I was putting there. And I think that was a really big catalyst for me to stop. And even thinking back, maybe one of the reasons why I was like, okay, enough. Like I'm going to start putting myself first here, because this isn't any longer about like trying to get a 6-pack or getting A's. This is about like my life and the health of how important our health is to us. So that still is a really big driver for me is, my dad, and like seeing that happen and seeing how important our health is. It really is everything.
Yeah. And so, and neurodegeneration, I mean, I'm fascinated by it as well. I'm super interested in the brain, and probably because it's like one of my biggest fears in a sense is like having this happen.
It's a lot of people's. Yeah. When I bring up the word dementia, it's like bringing up Voldemort. Like people are like, don't say it.
Right. Because it's like, if I think about it, it might happen to me kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
And isn't that a really interesting stress response? Like, I want to bury my head in the sand and not think about it until like it's too late, Yeah. And that's one of the, I mean, for a while I was really into nootropics and kind of experimenting with them.
Cool. Any success?
Well, I mean, I don't think I have dementia.
Well, no, but I mean, it can help you in your short term with your clarity and stuff too, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a really interesting, like I offline, we can probably dive into a little more detail, but what I'll say is it can be a bit of a slippery slope as well. So there were certain ones that I tried out that it was like, whoa, this is pretty amazing, like how I feel right now. But take that away, and all of a sudden I'm depressed. Because if that becomes your normal, it's like I rely on this and that like once I'd experienced sort of that level of cognitive functioning in one sense, it was like, oh crap, like when I
Mm-hmm.
don't have this. And so it probably contributed to a period of my life where I was really struggling with my mental health, ironically, where I
Mm-hmm.
thought I was trying to improve. There was many other factors, stress and things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
and so, but one of the ones I've continued to take is lion's mane mushroom. Um, that one
Okay.
I take that one like daily, and fish oils and bilberry, which is like a European blueberry. And so I look at the supplements that I take, and I'm really, trying to contribute to my cognitive health now. Um, the one thing that doesn't help is having a toddler that doesn't sleep, but
Yeah.
like,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Nothing.
yeah,
Yeah. I'm like, no wonder women, I think women are more statistically get dementia more. I'm like, no wonder. Of course
yeah,
we do.
yeah,
Like, of
yeah.
course we do. We don't sleep.
Right, right. And, as as like a parent too, it's like I didn't like know like how much I was going to love my little boy. Like
Mm,
I knew that I would enjoy being a dad, but I didn't know like how sort of emotionally bonded I would get to him like so early on. It's like, and so I can only imagine, like, and like for women, like I think, you grow this human, you birth them, you nurse them. Like there's I think, oh my, like, wow. And in the middle of the night, like he's like, shove, get out of here, dad. You're not your chopped liver, basically. And I'm like, I just want to comfort you. I love you too.
aw.
But I look, I get it. It's nothing personal, you know? Um,
Yeah, it'll come.
yeah,
It'll come. My son, like my husband is his favorite now. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that I think definitely makes it more challenging. So cognitive health is a really, really, like a really big thing that I think about a lot, partly because I went through a lot of stress. I went through trauma and PTSD and a lot of stress in my 30s, and probably didn't sleep a whole lot, and I nearly burned myself out on like stimulant abuse and things like that as well. So there's all these like crazy contributing factors, and I've just ticked over 40, so I'm like, man, I got to take this seriously. So probably for the last couple of years, I've taken a lot more seriously about really trying to nurture my brain health as much as possible for that reason.
Mhm.
But so what you're observing, I guess, is like gradually. I've heard dementia described as kind of like losing the person that you know, and does it feel like
Mm.
that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think unfortunately that's happened already. Like it's like my dad was here in December for a month. I think it was just over a month. And I have my kids are like my son was 5 and my daughter wasn't even 3 yet.
Mhm.
So I was looking after a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and my dad, and it was a lot.
Yeah.
Very different needs. Like the
Yes.
kids
Yeah.
need to run and explore and play, and my dad needs quiet walks with not a lot of stimulant. So yeah, he's not the same anymore. There's
Mm-hmm.
there's times where he will laugh and joke, and I can see him there,
Yeah.
but there's lots of times where he's just not the same person, and it is it is extremely challenging. And I mean, we haven't even come close, I don't think, to where it gets really, really like
Mm-hmm.
bad like that. um yeah, I mean, I think for me it was the hardest when we were first learning about this and he was first learning like his symptoms. That was really, it was just, I hadn't come to terms with it yet. And I
Yeah.
wouldn't say I've fully come to terms with it, but I've definitely,
Yeah.
it's that I don't have that emotional, like, why is this happening as much?
Right. Right.
They call the term for losing someone with dementia, like the slow progressive loss, ambiguous loss.
Okay.
That sort of trying to capture the confusion you have. Like they're still here, but they're not. And it's like, it's
Yeah.
confusing. And it's also confusing because you're like, I want to care for them. I want to help, but like I there's only so much I can do in my 30s when I'm trying to work and
Right.
build a
Yeah.
business and have little
No
kids.
kidding.
Like that, there's guilt there,
Yeah.
where you're not really there as much as you would like to be. Um,
Mm.
and so yeah, the whole thing is it's a lot to wrap your mind around. I think when I watch him and I watch things he can't do, it's the hard part for me is wrapping my mind around that. Like it, it's
And then it's not
and
coming back.
it's not coming back. I mean, there's this, and it's a very bizarre disease. Like, for example, I had him down. I thought maybe we could do a workout together because he can still move his body and stuff.
Right.
But the
Right.
problem is, like, I gave him a weight, and it's hard for him to, when I tell him to curl his arm up, he wants to like put his arm like this. Like he doesn't know what I mean, and like it's that part of his brain. I think dementia it's not necessarily Alzheimer's. Like they all have different parts of the brain they affect. So it's also just learning about, okay, like he can follow a conversation, which some people with Alzheimer's can't do necessarily, but it's that executive functioning that he struggles with. So, okay,
Right.
now I know, like the month over, I'm like, okay, so there's certain things that I have to help him with, or point out, or warn him, or tell him are there. It was lots of things with depth perception he struggled with, but I didn't need to tell him that the joke on the TV was funny, because he followed that perfectly.
Right.
So it's really challenging, just trying to figure out, you don't want to be annoying and like telling him things he knows. He needs to have all that independence that he can, but also not wanting to be completely ignorant and not telling him there's something in front of him and he trips on it.
Right. And
So
how much awareness does he have of this process happening? Has he gone through
full
like a kind of,
awareness,
and it must be
full
like,
awareness. Yeah.
it must be almost like torturous to like be aware that you're like
Yeah.
losing these functions, like, and just, like that probably like hurts almost as much to watch this person grasp like this is
Yeah.
what's happening to me and I can't stop the process now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about it a lot. Like even just going to bed, I'm like, man, like it'd be hard to go to bed knowing this was happening to your brain, and then like waking up in the dark. And I think even, when I was worried about him when he was here, because he wasn't in his surroundings, and it was very
Right.
hard for him just even to find the light switch in our house, because the bedroom is different than what he's used to. So when he was here, it was even, that process was even worse for him, because he was very much, it made him very aware that at how little he knew when he couldn't get the lights on. And at home, it's easier because he knows where everything is. So he might not be quite as aware it's happening there, because he's comfortable, and he can still, when he's home, go for walks out in the bush. For whatever reason, his brain is able to map the trails, which is,
Right.
I would get lost out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that awareness is, I don't quite, I mean, maybe one day I'll find out what it's like. And I don't know. I think it's just another thing you'd have to wrap your own mind around.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hopefully
Yeah.
not. And because you got a brilliant brain and a great heart for coaching as well. I mean, like as we kind of wrap up here, I just want to say, I'm so glad that you made the transition from like geoscientist to coach, because you've got a brilliant heart for this, and the coaching world needs more people like you. So,
Oh, thank you, John.
yeah, I
Yeah,
think
that means a lot coming from you.
and so if you were to, actually, you know what? If people want to know a little bit more about what they do, where can they find you? I guess because now they've heard you, and they're like, wow, this Jolene sounds pretty amazing. I'd like to work with her.
Yeah, they can find me on Instagram, Jolene Hermanson Coaching. And
Yeah.
then this is my website. Yeah. www.jolenehermanson.com. And, DM me at any point, or message me, email me, and we can set up a free consult, free 60-minute talk. Which, I mean, by the end of that talk, I just really want to hear kind of where people are at. And, we could set up a plan for them, even if they don't end up working with me. It's more just for us to get to know each other and see if it'd be a good fit or not.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that's a great way to go about it. You're incredibly easy to talk to. So anybody who is like thinking about connecting with you, I'm like, it feels like talking to an old friend,
Aw. It does. It does with you too. I don't know if that's like the UVic, maybe like the UVic background, or
it could be. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was a chemistry major at UVic way back in the day. So
yeah.
pardon me, if you were to kind of just share one final takeaway from your experience, if you could give people one nugget that might help them take one step forward in their journey, what would you like to share with people?
I think it goes back to what we were talking about with the self-compassion. Like I found that whenever I've gotten hard on myself, even with my business or with parenting, it's always because I'm not showing myself self-compassion. And because I'm not showing myself self-compassion, I'm typically not showing the other person compassion either. And going back to that curiosity and kindness and connected humanity, I think, if you're struggling in anything, if you take it back to that as your foundation, typically the rest of the answers will show up.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, Jolene, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. That was awesome.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become. And I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.